Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel WasThe Stories. Today's story is massive suspense for Manila folder. So let's go play.
For 8 years, my wife told everyone I was the reason we never had a family. I never defended myself. Then she announced she was pregnant and expected me to smile. I quietly packed one folder and left without an argument. 2 days later, her father opened that folder and the room went completely silent. My name is Callum Reyes, and for 8 years, I let my wife tell a lie to everyone who mattered to me. I let her mother whisper it at Thanksgiving. I let her sister say it to my face, wrapped in fake sympathy. I let my own father believe it, right up until the day he died, still patting my shoulder and telling me it wasn't my fault that Marisol and I never had children. I never said a word. Not once. Because the truth was mine to carry, and I had decided, somewhere in the 3rd year of our marriage, that carrying it alone was easier than watching her explain it to a room full of people who loved her more than they had ever bothered to love me. That's the part nobody understands when I tell this story now. I wasn't a coward. I was protecting her, or I thought I was. There's a difference between those two things that took me 8 years and one folder to finally understand. Let me take you back to the morning it ended. It was a Tuesday in October, the kind of gray, wet morning where the whole city seems to be holding its breath. I was standing at the kitchen island with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, half listening to the radio, when Marisol walked in wearing the soft blue robe she only wore on good mornings. She had a look on her face I hadn't seen in years, not since our 2nd anniversary maybe. Bright, nervous, lit up from somewhere underneath. "Cal," she said, and her voice cracked on the single syllable of my name. "I'm pregnant." I want to tell you my first feeling was joy. That's what a normal man would feel. Standing in his kitchen hearing those words from his wife after 8 childless years of neighbors, pitying glances and family dinners where somebody always brought up the subject like it was their business. But that isn't what I felt. What I felt was the floor tilting very slightly beneath me like a boat catching an unexpected wave. Because I knew, with the kind of clean cold certainty that only comes once or twice in a man's life, that the child in her belly could not possibly be mine. Not because I doubted her fidelity in some vague, jealous husband way. I knew it as a matter of plain, undeniable fact. A fact I had never told her. A fact that only one other person on this earth knew, and that person was a doctor in a small clinic 40 minutes outside the city, a man named Dr. Okonkwo Hale, who 8 years ago had sat across from me with a manila folder and told me, gently, that the results were conclusive and that biological fatherhood was not something I would ever experience. I remember asking him if there was any chance the tests were wrong. He'd shaken his head slowly and said the word conclusive again, like repeating it might soften it. I never told Marisol. I told myself I was protecting her from the shame of it, as if infertility were a shameful thing at all, which it isn't, but grief does strange arithmetic in a young husband's mind. I told myself it would break something between us if she knew, that she'd look at me differently, that the family she'd always dreamed of, the noisy Sunday dinners, the small shoes by the door, would become an ache she'd blame me for on purpose instead of by accident. So I let her mother call me stubborn. I let her sister Priya tell people at parties that I wasn't ready and that Marisol was so patient with him. I let my own reflection in the mirror each morning absorb blame that was never mine to take, because I thought silence was a kind of love. Standing in that kitchen on that gray Tuesday, watching my wife's face glow with a joy I couldn't share and couldn't explain, I understood, all at once, like a window shattering, that 8 years of silence had not protected anyone. It had only bought time, and the bill had finally come due. I didn't yell. I want that understood clearly, because when people hear this story they expect shouting, a scene, something dramatic and loud. There was none of that. I set my coffee mug down on the counter so carefully it didn't even click against the granite. I looked at her. Really looked, the way you look at someone when you already know a chapter of your life is closing, and I said, "Congratulations, Mari, that's wonderful." She smiled, relieved, not understanding yet what those words had cost me or what they meant. I went upstairs. I did not pack a suitcase. I did not take my clothes, or my watch, or the wedding ring sitting in its little dish by the bathroom sink. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one she never touched, and I took out a single, slightly worn manila folder I had kept hidden there for 8 years. I walked back downstairs, past her still standing in the kitchen with one hand resting on her stomach, past the life-size lie we had built together, and I walked out the front door without a single word of explanation. 2 days later, her father would be the one to open that folder, and when he did, the room would go completely silent. I spent that first night in a motel off Route 9, the kind of place with a flickering vacancy sign and a bedspread that smelled like someone else's cigarettes. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the mattress with the folder on my knees, not opening it, just resting my hand flat on the cover, the way you'd rest a hand on a coffin before it closes. I didn't need to read it again. I had every line memorized, Dr. Okonkwo Hale's careful handwriting on the cover sheet, The clinical language that had tried so hard to be kind and still managed to feel like a verdict. I had read that folder so many times in the early years that the paper had gone soft at the corners like fabric. What I hadn't decided yet, what kept me staring at the ceiling until the sun came up, was what I was going to do with it. Leaving Marisol wasn't really a decision. It was more like something that had already happened inside me long before my body caught up and walked out the door. The decision that mattered, the one that actually terrified me, was whether I was going to let this become public, whether I was going to hand her family the truth after 8 years of letting them hand me the blame. Because here's the thing, nobody tells you about carrying someone else's secret. It doesn't just protect them, it also erases you. For 8 years, I had been the husband who couldn't give her a family. Spoken about in low voices at gatherings, patted on the back with a sad little smile that always had pity folded into it, and underneath every one of those moments was a truth I could have spoken and didn't. I had let myself become a smaller man than I was, one sentence at a time, because I loved her and thought love meant absorbing whatever she needed me to absorb. I called in sick to work the next morning, the first sick day I'd taken in 3 years, and I drove to my sister Odalis's apartment 2 towns over. She opened the door in her scrubs, ready for a night shift, took one look at my face, and didn't ask a single question. She just stepped aside and let me in. I told her everything that night, the diagnosis 8 years ago, the silence I'd chosen, the pregnancy announcement, the folder sitting on her coffee table between us like something radioactive. Odalis is not a soft-spoken woman. She listened with her arms crossed and her jaw tight, and when I finished, she said, "Cal, you have spent 8 years letting that family use you as their explanation for something that was never your fault. And now you're sitting here trying to decide if you have the right to finally tell the truth. You don't need permission for that. You needed it 8 years ago." I didn't have a response to that. I still don't, honestly. Not one that makes me look any better than I looked in that moment. A grown man who had confused loyalty with self-erasure for nearly a decade. The next day, I got the call. Marisol's father, Grigory, a formal, careful man who had never quite warmed to me, who I think always suspected I wasn't ambitious enough for his daughter, wanted to see me. Marisol had gone to him in tears, apparently, telling him I had walked out the moment she shared the best news of her life, that I had said nothing, packed nothing but some folder, and vanished. I understood, in that phone call, that the story was already being told without me in the room to correct it. Grigory's voice had that particular chill fathers get when they believe their daughter has been wronged. He asked me to come to the house. He said Marisol would not be there. She'd gone to stay with Priya to process, but he wanted to speak with me man to man, find out what on earth I thought I was doing. I agreed. I told him I would bring the folder. He didn't ask what was in it. I think looking back, he assumed it was paperwork. Divorce documents, maybe. Something cold and legal that would confirm whatever version of me he'd already built in his head. A man too weak or too selfish to want a family, now formalizing his cowardice with a lawyer's letterhead. I drove to that house 2 days after I'd walked out of it, the same house where I'd spent 8 Christmases smiling through comments about when the two of you finally settle down and have kids. I remember sitting in the driveway for almost 10 minutes before I could make myself get out of the car, the folder resting on the passenger seat like it was watching me. I want to be honest about what I was feeling in that driveway, because this isn't a story about a righteous man delivering justice. I was afraid. Not of Grigory. He was intimidating, but I could handle intimidating. I was afraid of what would happen to Marisol once the truth was out. I still loved her. That's the part people find hardest to believe when I tell this story now. Even walking up to that door with 8 years of silence in a folder under my arm, some part of me was still trying to protect her. I knocked. Grigory opened the door himself, his expression already arranged into something stern and disappointed, ready for a confrontation he thought he understood. He had no idea what he was about to read. Grigory led me into his study without a word, the same dark-paneled room where he'd once given me a stiff, formal blessing before my wedding, back when he still believed I was a man capable of taking care of his daughter properly. He sat behind his desk. He didn't offer me a chair, so I stood, the folder held against my chest like something I still wasn't ready to let go of. "Well," he said, folding his hands, "Marisol tells me you left without a word. On the day she told you she was pregnant. I raised her better than to marry a man who runs from good news, Callum. So explain yourself. What is so important in that folder that it mattered more than your wife's joy?" I remember the sound the folder made when I set it down on his desk. A soft, papery slap, almost gentle, completely disproportionate to what was inside it. "Read it," I said, "then ask me again why I left." He opened it slowly, the way careful men open things they don't yet know to be afraid of. The first page was the letter from Dr. Okonkwo Hale's office, dated 8 years and 4 months earlier. I watched his eyes move down the page, watched the exact moment the words landed, his eyebrows drawing together, then his mouth opening slightly, then closing again. This says, he started and stopped. It says I am not, and have never been, biologically capable of having children, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. 8 years of silence had apparently been saving itself up for exactly this moment. It's dated 8 years ago, before every dinner where your wife told me I should stop being so stubborn, before every party where Priya told people I wasn't ready, before every single time this family decided, without asking me, that the empty nursery in our house was my fault. Grigori did not say anything. He turned the page. The second document was one he hadn't been expecting, because I hadn't told him it existed. I'd almost left it out of the folder that morning, and I still don't fully know why I didn't. It was a stack of letters, 8 of them, one written every year on our anniversary. Letters I had written to Marisol and never given her. In the first one, written the year after the diagnosis, I had tried to find the words to tell her the truth and couldn't finish the sentence. By the third letter, I had stopped trying to explain and started simply writing down what I felt. The grief, the guilt, the strange devotion of choosing, again and again, to protect her from a truth that was mine to carry, not hers to be shamed by. I watched Grigori read the fourth letter. I watched something in his face come loose. You wrote these, he said quietly. Every year. Every year, I said. I told myself I was protecting her from feeling broken. I told myself the truth would hurt her more than the lie hurt me. I was wrong about a lot of things, Grigori, but I want you to understand, I never once blamed her. I let this family blame me instead, because I thought that was what loving her looked like. He set the folder down. The room was so quiet I could hear the hallway clock ticking through the closed door. Then the child, he said slowly, and I watched him do the arithmetic I had already done, alone, at that kitchen island 2 days earlier. If you cannot, then the child isn't mine, I said. I'm not angry about that. Not the way you might expect. People make mistakes. Marriages go through things. What I can't forgive, what I walked out over, isn't the pregnancy. It's that she let me spend 8 years as the villain in a story where I was actually the only person protecting her secret. The study door opened before Grigori could respond. Marisol stood in the doorway, still in her coat, her face pale in a way I had never seen before, like she already understood exactly what conversation she'd walked into. Behind her, hovering uncertainly in the hall, was Priya. And just beyond Priya, arriving late and confused, was someone else entirely. Someone whose presence in that hallway answered a question I hadn't even known I still needed answered. Grigori looked up at his daughter, the folder still open on the desk in front of him, 8 years of silence laid bare in careful black ink. Marisol, he said, and his voice had gone very soft, very old. Sit down. We need to talk about whose baby this actually is. The man in the hallway was Julian Aldrete. I recognized him after a beat. A colleague of Marisol's from the architecture firm, a man I'd shaken hands with at office holiday parties, a man who had once complimented my tie and asked me how the wife was doing, smiling like he had every right to ask. He didn't come into the study. He stood frozen in the hallway, and the look on his face when he saw the open folder on Grigori's desk told me everything the letters hadn't already confirmed. Marisol turned, saw him standing there, and something in her posture collapsed, like a wall giving way all at once after years of quiet pressure. Cal, she said, and my name came out of her broken in half. I can explain. I want to tell you I felt triumphant in that moment. I didn't. I felt exhausted, in a way that went all the way down to my bones. The particular exhaustion of a man who has just watched a truth he already knew become a truth everyone else finally had to see too. You don't owe me an explanation anymore, Mari, I said. You owed me one 8 years ago. The first time your mother called me stubborn in front of me, and you said nothing. You owed me one every single time Priya told a room full of people I wasn't ready. I gave you 8 years of silence because I thought I was protecting you from shame. I didn't understand yet that you'd let me carry shame that was never mine, so you wouldn't have to carry the truth that was. She was crying by then, and Grigori, a man I had never once seen show softness toward me, stood up from behind his desk and walked around it, and for a moment I thought he might defend her, the way fathers do. Instead, he looked at Julian in the hallway, and then at his daughter, and something in his face hardened in a direction I hadn't expected. 8 years, he said, almost to himself. 8 years, we told him it was his fault. Nobody in that room had an answer for that, including Marisol. I'm not going to pretend the rest of that conversation was clean or dignified. There was more crying. There was Priya trying, badly, to defend her sister, until Grigori told her, in a voice I'd never heard him use, to be quiet. There was Julian, finally finding the courage to step into the doorway and say my name, and me telling him, calmly, because I genuinely had nothing left to prove to him, that he could have his conversation with Marisol without me in the room. I left that house for the second time in 3 days, and this time nobody watched me go with confusion. They watched me go understanding, finally, exactly what they were losing. Not a stubborn husband who'd failed to give his wife a family, but a man who had spent 8 years quietly absorbing blame that was never his, because he loved someone enough to let himself be misunderstood rather than let her be exposed. It's been a year and a half now. Marisol and I finalized the divorce in the spring. She kept the house. I kept my letters, or copies of them anyway. The original stayed in that folder, in Grigori's desk drawer, where he told me he intended to keep them as a reminder, he said, of how easily a family can build a lie out of someone else's silence and call it truth. I don't know the details of what happened between Marisol and Julian after that day, and I've made peace with not knowing. What I do know is that Grigori called me, months later, not to apologize exactly, he's not a man built for apologies, but to say that he'd been wrong about me for 8 years, and that he was sorry it took a folder on his desk to see it. Here's what I understand now, that I didn't understand standing in that kitchen with my coffee going cold. Silence is not the same thing as love, no matter how noble it feels in the moment. I thought I was protecting Marisol by carrying the weight of a diagnosis that was never something to be ashamed of in the first place. What I was actually doing was teaching everyone around us, her family, her friends, even her, that my dignity was negotiable, that I would absorb whatever story was easiest for everyone else to believe. If there's one thing I'd tell the man I was that Tuesday morning standing at the kitchen island, it's this. Protecting someone you love should never require erasing yourself to do it. The truth costs something to speak, but silence, I learned, costs more. It just lets you pay in smaller, quieter installments for so many years that you almost don't notice the debt until somebody else finally opens the folder and the whole room goes still. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done being quiet.
Drop your thoughts in the comment for these stories and like, share, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.